Before noon, they found the burned wagon and the 2 dead men, and the 3rd staked to the ground, staring at the sun, because he could not close his eyes with the lids cut off. Nor could he speak with his tongue gone. He tried to tell them by writing in the sand, but the marks made little sense because he could not see what he was writing, and he died before he could make them plainer. But out of a mesquite clump, only a dozen yards from the wagon, his men dragged an Apache who had been shot through both legs, and there was all the explanation that was needed. He could not speak English, and none of the soldiers could speak Chiricahua Apache, so the sergeant dragged him back into the mesquite. There was the heavy report of a revolving pistol, and the sergeant reappeared, smiling. The hell with it, Flynn thought. He felt the barber's fingers rubbing hard against his scalp. His eyes were still closed, but he could no longer see the man without the eyelids. He heard the barber say then, "You're starting to lose your hair up front." Willett combed the hair, which was straighter than usual with the tonic, brushing it almost flat across the forehead, then began to trim Flynn's full, cavalry-type mustache. The thinning hair and dragoon mustache made him appear older, yet there was a softness to the weather-tanned face. It was thin-lined, and the bone structure was small. Dave Flynn was a month beyond his 31st birthday, but from 15 feet, he looked 40. That's what patrols in Apache country will do. "Hang on," John Willett said, moving around the chair. "I see a couple of wild hares." He took a finer comb from that shelf, and turning back to Flynn, he looked up to see the small, black-suited man enter the shop. "Mr. Medora." Flynn opened his eyes. Standing the way he was, just inside the doorway with his thumbs hooked into vest pockets, Joe Medora could be mistaken for a dry goods drummer. He was under average height and heavy, his black suit clinging tightly to a thick frame, and the derby placed evenly over his eyebrows might have been a size too small. His mustache and gray-streaked beard told that he was well into his 50s, and probably too old to be much good with the pistol he wore high on his right hip. But Joe Medora had been underestimated before, many times, by Apaches as well as white men. Most of them were dead, while Joe was still chief of scouts at Fort Bowie. He stood unmoving, staring at Dave Flynn, until finally Flynn said, "What's the matter with you?" Medora's grizzled face was impassive. "I'm trying to figure out if you got on a fancy braid charro rig under that barber cloth. It takes longer than a year and a half to go Mexican." Flynn nodded to the antlers mounted next to the door. "There's my coat, right there." Medora glanced at the faded tan coat. "You're about due for a new one." "I'm not the dude you are." "You bet your sweet tookus you're not." Flynn smiled faintly, watching the man who had taught him everything he knew about the Apache. The comical-looking little man who could almost read sign in the air, and better than half the time beat the Apache at his own game. He had learned well from Joe Medora, and after he had resigned his commission, it was Joe who had recommended him and saw that he had got a job as a contract guide. "I hear you're back for more," Medora said. "You know of an easier way to make money?" "Just two. Find gold or a rich woman." "Well, I've given up on finding gold." "And no woman'd have a slow-moving son of a bitch like you, so you don't have a choice at that." John Willett said, "Joe, let me trim your beard. Be done here in a minute." Medora nodded and eased himself into the other bar.